Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. My name is Philip Siegert, Deputy Research Director at MCC Brussels. And on behalf of MCC Brussels, I warmly welcome you to tonight's discussion, which is a conversation on national identity and mass migration, clash of values, ? To address this question, we're happy to have with us two people eminently familiar with the issues surrounding immigration, integration, and societal identity. Our first speaker tonight is Nicolas Pouvreau-Monti, co-founder and director general of the Paris-based Observatory of Immigration and Demography, Observatoire de l'immigration et de la démographie. This institution is a think tank that specializes on the analysis of demographic long-term trends and its effects on society and policymaking in France. The observatory's works are an important source of data and information for Parliament as well as the government, and cover not only the national but also regional and local levels, particularly in its assessment of integration policies. Having been created in 2020, the observatory has quickly gained a prime spot in French debates on the essential issues related to immigration, and Nicolas Pouvreau-Monti himself is called upon for his knowledge of these matters by members both of the legislative and the executive branch of government, but also the media. He thus contributes to institutional as well as public debates. It is a great pleasure for us to have him with us tonight. A warm welcome, Nicolas Pouvreau-Monti. The second speaker of tonight's panel is Göran Adamsson. Trained as a sociologist, he holds a PhD from the London School of Economics and is associate professor at the European University of Applied Sciences. He has worked extensively on the concepts, workings, and the shortcomings of multiculturalism, particularly in his home country, Sweden. He has authored half a dozen books on this topic, both focusing on the national as well as the European levels. Among his publications are his 2021 book on masochist nationalism, multicultural self-hatred, and the infatuation with the exotic, published by Routledge, and a report entitled Multiculturalism in Flames, Sweden's Rude Awakening, published by us. As a sociologist, he has a keen interest in societal developments and the factors of social cohesion, which is why he is particularly knowledgeable on the cultural aspects of immigration and integration. Thank you for having accepted our invitation to Brussels. A warm welcome, Göran Adamsson.
Thank you.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your interest in tonight's conversation and for taking the time to be with us. The majordome of this event is the MCC Chief of Staff, Anthony Gilland, and I give you into his hands now. He will moderate the panel and guide tonight's discussion. And so without further ado, Tony, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Philip. Thank you indeed. My first time as majordome, so wish me luck, or bonne chance. Okay, so look, we know what we're here to talk about, but just to say, as mass migration, that's been a big topic for all the different elections. It's right on the top of the agenda. But what we're trying to do here is to really zoom in also on the clash of values, the whole question of what it means to have so much, such a mix of population without integration. So a very specific focus that we're keen to explore. So as Philip said, Nicolas, you will go first, up to 15 minutes. Okay. If you get to 15 minutes, I'll just hold that up. Yeah, okay. And then obviously we'll have Göran. Then we'll have a little chat, just a brief chat amongst ourselves to give Nicolas a chance to respond to Göran and vice versa. And then really, really key, as always at MCC Brussels, is to come out and collect all your points, arguments and questions, which we look forward to. So, without further ado, please, Nicolas.
Thank you very much, Tony.
Would you like to take to the podium?
As you wish. I can stay here, actually.
Okay, all right.
Is it working? Yeah, okay, wonderful. Good evening, everyone. First of all, of course, I would like to thank MCC Brussels and its team for their kind invitation to address this conference. I'm very glad to be here with you today. as we discussed, I'm going to share with you a few elements about the topics of migration and the cultural and demographic changes our continent Europe is currently experiencing as a result of migration. To some extent, the views I'm going to share with you will come from a French perspective, not only because I'm a Frenchman, but also because the trends at work in France may quite accurately reflect trends which are at work all across Western Europe. And because, along with the UK, France has been one of the very first European countries to experience a significant level of non-European immigration, beginning in the 1960s by what was mostly a temporary work immigration at the time, and then by the late 1970s, family reunification policies were put in place, which drastically changed both the scale and the nature of immigration, mostly coming from North Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Turkey. This dynamic still goes on nowadays and is now actually bigger than ever. I will have the opportunity to come back to it later on. To understand the full impact of the cultural and demographic change many of us can testify, we have to look at it from a broader perspective, which is that of what we call the demographic winter Europe is currently going through. We owe this concept of demographic winter to Sorbonne professor Gérard François Dumont, who is a member of the Scientific Council of our organization. This concept covers a very simple and clear reality, which is that in many developed countries, since the end of the demographic renewal following the Second World War, what we call the baby boom, birth rate levels have been persistently below the simple level for the replacement of generations, which is of 2.1 children per woman in countries with a good state of health. Well, it is important to note that demographic winter is not unique to Europe. This phenomenon can also be testified in Southeast Asia, for example, in Australia, in Japan, in New Zealand, etc., in Russia as well. But what I would say sets Europe apart is that this long-term decline in European fertility has been happening at the same time as a strong and quick population growth in the most neighboring continent, which is Africa. The average fertility rate in Africa was 4.18 children per woman last year. Twice as many children are now born every year in Nigeria as in all the countries of the European Union combined. The population of Africa has already doubled since 1990, and it is expected to grow by a further billion by 2050, from 1.4 billion to 2.4 billion people, half of whom will be under the age of 25. So what we have is a reversed situation on both sides of the Mediterranean Sea. We have the world's oldest continent, Europe, which is face-to-face, geographically speaking, with the youngest continent in the world, which is Africa. Today, 40% of the African population is under the age of 15, compared with only 16% of the European population, while almost 20% of the European population is over the age of 65, compared with less than 4% of the African population. So I think I won't be surprising anyone in stating that this asymmetry has resulted in what can only be described as a migration boom. A comprehensive look at the major trends at work in the member states of the EU can be based on the solid databases of Eurostat. You know Eurostat, which is the statistical office of the European Commission. And analysis of this data reveals the migration shock our nations have been experiencing over the last decade. And this shows, I would say, how difficult it is to try to implement integration policies with numbers which are so significant. Just to share a few numbers, 8 million first applications for asylum have been registered in the EU between 2013 and 2023. We need to take the measure of what such a volume represents. In demographic terms, these cumulative flows are equivalent to the admission by the EU of a new member state, which would be the 15th of the whole Union by the size of its population, just after Austria and before Bulgaria. Of course, granting asylum to the applicants is not systematic, but the issue of I would say, making people who got their asylum application rejected leave the country is a very hard topic for many governments, for most of governments actually in the EU. I know that in France, 9 out of 10 rejected asylum applicants remain in the country afterwards. So 8 million people have arrived through asylum right over the last decade. The annual number of first application to the EU has tripled between 2013 and 2023. There were more than 1 million applications which were lodged in the EU last year. This is the first time this, I would say, 1 million limit was passed since the 2015-2016 migrant crisis, which had been the previous peak. Another angle of view concerns the classic indicator of legal immigration, which is residence permits. The annual number of first residence permits granted in the European Union has risen by 129% between 2013 and 2023. 3.7 million first residence permits were granted by EU member states last year, which is the highest level ever recorded. This is due to, I would say, two simultaneous factors. On the one hand, there is what we could call an enforceable right to immigration, which is permitted and protected by certain provisions of EU law and EHCR law. Of course, everything that has to deal with family reunification, for example. And on the other hand, we have a desire from some governments to offset demographic decline by relying on immigration to renew the working population mostly. So all these migratory and demographic shifts are obviously reflected in the demographic and cultural structures of our countries now in a way that is absolutely radically unprecedented in European history. I may take a quick look at the case of France as an example of broader trends. I said that Europe was experiencing a demographic winter. For a long time, France was doing a little bit better. We had a fertility rate which was about 2 children per woman. This is not the case anymore. It has been declining sharply over the last 15 years. However, it is important to note and to emphasize that this demographic winter in France conceals very different realities and even actually contrasting trends depending on the migratory origins of the population. This is particularly true when we look at the breakdown of births according to parents' own place of birth. If we take the year 2000, just over 20 years ago, almost 25 years ago, as our chronological reference point, what we get is that since the year 2000, the annual number of births in France with 2 parents born in France has fallen by 28%, so has fallen by more than a quarter. And over the same period of time, births with at least 1 parent born outside of the EU have risen by 36%, and they have even risen by 73% for births with 2 parents with 2 parents born outside of the EU. So what we get is really, I would say, a contradictory dynamics. We have a native population which is shrinking, especially in its births, while births from non-EU immigrants have been increased very significantly. So this is reflected in the distribution of births in France last year, 2023. 30% of all children born in France last year had at least 1 parent who was born outside of the European Union. So once you get an idea of this, I would say, basic demographic facts, you get a sense of how difficult it is to implement immigration policies which would be able to address a phenomena which is, I would say, so massive in numbers and so I would say contradictory to the native trends of the population. You know, the demographic winter on one end, demographic spring of the global south on the other end. There are various factors to explain the data I just gave you about the births. One, of course, is the acceleration of immigration. I'm not coming back to it. I already shared a few data. And the other one is what we could call the different fertility rates of some immigrant populations. The most recent data we get from the OECD tells us that in France, women born outside of the EU had an average fertility rate of 3.27 children per woman in 2019, which was the double of native women. So, of course, I'm coming back to it. When you have these contradictory trends, it's very hard for, I would say, the welcomed populations to integrate to a shrinking, welcoming population. Of course, integration policies have to be tried anyway, they have to be put in place, and they have to deal with a range of social and cultural changes triggered by these demographic shifts. I'm going to focus shortly before concluding and letting Joran have his turn on the impact on the religious landscape, still relying on the French example, and the rapid rise of Islam, since France now has the largest Muslim population in Europe. In France, almost all Muslims are either immigrants or children of immigrants. So the development of Islam in France is therefore, I would say, tightly linked to immigration. The onset and acceleration of non-European immigration from the 1960s onwards can be approached by analyzing the proportion of newborn boys holding an Arabic/Muslim first name. It was almost equal to 0 up until 1950 in France. It started rising from the mid-1960s up until the mid-1990s, when it stagnated at around 7 or 8% for a decade. And then it started rising again from the late 1990s. This number of newborn boys with an Arabic Muslim first name has tripled between 1997 and last year. So this is data based on the research conducted by researchers Jérôme Fourquet and Sylvain Maternac in France. And what we have is that, according to the latest available data, we now have more than 20%, 21% of newborn boys in France who have an Arabic/Muslim first name. So I said how tightly linked Islam and immigration were in France. 44% of immigrants and 32% of the children of immigrants declare themselves to be Muslims in France, compared with barely 1% of French people with no immigrant parents. Of course, this percentage varies greatly according to the countries of origin. You got almost 90% of immigrants from Algeria, Morocco, or Tunisia, for example, which are very, I would say, frequent immigrant nationalities in France, who declare themselves to be Muslims. And there's still a majority of the children of these immigrants who declare themselves to be Muslims. So we can see that the secularization trend, which is going through all European societies, is not going through to the same extent and to the same pace, whether you look at native populations or whether you look at immigrant populations. So this migratory factor therefore plays a key role in the rapid growth of Islam, and there are 3 factors for it. Once again, the acceleration in immigration flows. Secondly, again, the differentiated birth rates. And thirdly, what we could call the greater transmission of religion within Muslim families, which can be testified in all the migratory origins concerned. I'm going to conclude here so that the discussion can continue. The idea of sharing with you this data was only, I would say, to set up a framework for our discussion. The issues of I would say, cultural assimilation or multicultural policies, the issues of how to be able to, I would say, to maintain and pursue a national destiny, a national sense of belonging in the context of this unprecedentedly rapid change is obviously a serious question, a grave question. And this question, will only be able to be addressed, in my opinion, by first and foremost taking care of what's at the root cause of this question, that is to say, immigration itself, numbers themselves, and we won't be able to, I would say, to ease the, I would say, the cultural unease many European societies are going through if we don't start by tackling immigration numbers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nicolas.
Thank you, Tony.
Okay, that was fascinating. Thank you. Now, Iran, I'm sure equally fascinating. Your turn.
I hope so. Hello, everybody. It's wonderful to be here, and thanks for being invited to MCC again, and to give a little bit more sociological perspective on similar issues. And I'm looking forward a lot to listening to the audience. So I will not speak for half an hour, but maybe 10-15 minutes I think should be enough. When I was preparing this speech, I thought about what things look like and what kind of a speech I should give, and then I decided I thought about I could hold like some kind of normal, relaxed speech, informative, witty, ironic, sociologically detached, but I think I shall try to give a little bit of a different speech if I can, because I think the situation in Europe is becoming rather tense over the last years. And some of you maybe saw Eva Hernik, the Member of Parliament. She was talking and she gave a rather sharp speech, basically an accusation against van der Leyen for having put Europe in a tough place. So there are tendencies towards polarization, and that things are speeding up, not necessarily in the right direction, to put it humbly. And to give support for this, that things are changing in Europe in maybe the wrong direction, I'd just like to give a few cases in point. In Sweden, my country, and I know people who work in these bureaucracies and institutions, they are being infiltrated by Islamists and other radical migrant groups, such as the Migration Authority and other bureaucracies. And this is a much bigger thing than people seem to realize. And if this is going on, what is Swedish and the Swedish welfare state will slowly start caving in. It's just one case in point. And we've been having over the last years big demonstrations in Sweden against our welfare state for kidnapping Muslim children. And this has been reported on Al Jazeera numerous times. And this, of course, creates tensions in Sweden, huge tensions. And we are innocent to this. We are not doing anything bad. If a child is in trouble, we need to help that child, regardless of background. And another case in point, in Malmö, my old hometown, I know the rabbi at the synagogue, and he told me that they used to have a vibrant community in Malmö, but over the last years, the number of Jews living in Malmö is going down, and soon Malmö might be, he told me, it might be Judenrein, which is a German phrase for they will no longer be any Jews in Malmö. So that's another case in point. And in Belgium, I just read Berlingske, a very, very good Danish newspaper, saying, and I hope this is true, or I guess this is true, that many teachers here in this city, in Brussels, are considering to give up due to being pressurized by Islamists. So the education system in Brussels, and I guess in Belgium, and also maybe in other parts we don't know about, is being tilted and tainted and being pushed away from what they are supposed to teach according to European ideas and values and so forth. And then, of course, we had the Jew hunt, which is a terrible term in its own right, of course, in Amsterdam. And this is not 1930s, this is today. And how this can happen is like beyond me, as you can say. And things are happening in France and other countries. There are numerous similar worrying cases of escalating tensions between European values and Muslim values, I fear to say. So wherever you look, you get the impression that Islamists have been stepping up their actions over the last years. At least that is my impression. I think you could talk about a shift. I think you could talk about a kind of different reality where religious groups are putting their foot on the pedal and to try to speed up things a little bit, cautiously, but still you can notice it. And Brussels somehow seems to be in the limelight of it, at the heart of Europe. And if you just go back a few hundred years, you knew that at the heart of any country, any culture, there were people who were in charge of it, and they were the most adamant defenders, the most stern defenders of that particular culture. And here we have Brussels, And here, strangely enough, ironically enough, we seem to have people who seem to be sometimes less interested than the normal average population, the normal worker, the normal, person out there to defend European values. So the whole thing has been turned upside down. The coat has come inside out. And that's a very strange shift. It's a revolution, you could say. And it has happened without many people have noticed it, I think. Right. So I was thinking about the idea of a litmus test. I still think that maybe if you want to use the idea of a litmus test of this new reality, in my view, maybe it is shown by the worsening situation for Jews throughout Europe. And not only in Europe. At American universities, Jews are forbidden sometimes to enter the university buildings. And this is happening now. And so how, just to link this little introduction to the topics for the evening, how does this overview relate to the topics for the evening? Just a few points. I would say that the above cases about the Jews in Europe and in the West, we can witness a left-wing agenda without principles. They have no principles. They have no political principles. If you imagine skinheads had been behind this Jew hunt in Amsterdam, we can all guess what our academics and what the media would do. The response would be very different and much, much more powerful. But now, suddenly, Jew hatred is no longer that bad, apparently, obviously, strangely. So the left cares about Jews when it fits into their own agenda, when it fits into the left's agenda, or else Jews have little value or no value. When caring about Jews may collide with the left's interests in possible future votes, namely votes from migrant groups, then it seems Jews are less important. So sometimes it's hard not to get ironic, even when you really try hard to write a serious paper. I have to say that. Second point I'd like to make. Why is this happening? Why are Islamists behaving like this, seemingly engaging in what some call a hostile takeover, an attempt at a hostile takeover of central Western institutions, such as schools and bureaucracies? I was thinking about it, and I suggest they do it for a special reason. They do it because they can. They do it because they can do it. And how come they can do it? I think they can do it because of multiculturalism. They can do it because of multiculturalism. And that would be something interesting to talk about, I think. And the third point I'd like to address here is something that was also up, in the blurb for this talk here. Why don't they want to integrate? I mean, that's a question that comes up all the time. I think this question is the most telling question of all the questions circulating around multiculturalism. And my comment is this. Yes, why doesn't a person born and raised in a deeply religious society, in a religion alien to Christianity and everything it stands for, a society where men and women are strictly divided, strictly kept apart, and where your entire sense of safety revolves around your family, your clan, and your tribe, and where our Western state is nothing but a name? Why doesn't this person immediately desire to give all this up for something of which he knows nothing? And probably, and I can't blame him subjectively, holds in contempt. How is this possible? Yes, why don't they want to integrate when our society is so much better? And the fourth point I'd like to make, can we even talk about, this is also something very important topic for tonight's discussion, can we even talk about a Belgian identity? Can we talk about a Swedish identity? After having been subjected to multiculturalism for decades, and should I add postmodernity, which has an odd, interesting similarity to multiculturalism for many reasons. Can we talk about Swedish values? What are our values if we need to spit them out? What are they about? Are our values really multiculturalism? Are they even compatible with multiculturalism? Are values such as openness, tolerance, and individual freedom multicultural values, i.e., weak values with no backbone? Or are they rather our firm values that cannot be sacrificed for diversity or multiculturalism? So, what I'm saying here is that our values might seem weak and tolerant, and yet they may be very firm. We are convinced as a political extremist, as a religious fanatic, about the virtues and the righteousness of our values. And these values happen to be tolerance, happen to be openness. But that doesn't mean we will trade them for anything. You see, I think this is an interesting point of discussion also. And my fifth case fifth point here, if we apply multiculturalism, the question arises what migrants are supposed to be integrated into. If all we have is some lefty global understanding and cultural self-harassment, is this enough as a foundation for cultural newcomers? Is it really enough to say that all we have is some kind of global values and a very critical idea of who we are? Does it work? Will they understand it? Right, and this leads on to a crucial aspect also mentioned in the program: moral norms. Moral norms. Clearly, we can eat different food, we can have diverse haircuts, and we can still claim to live in a society together and live peacefully, surely. But if we walk around with diametrically opposite basic moral norms, for instance around the role of women in society, what happens? That you could say is the litmus test of diversity. That is the litmus test of diversity. You need to test it. Can we then live peacefully in a common society? Can we avoid conflicts? Can we avoid conflicts? And the last thing I'd like to bring up before we, have some nice discussion here, all of us, it touches upon another left-wing treasure, another left-wing, cherished idea, namely the idea that we must focus on things we share, quote unquote, on the things we share, instead of things we do not share. We must engage in dialogue. We must seek common ground. We must find commonalities, and so on. And this clearly all sounds very tolerant, very progressive, very humane. And of course, it is a virtue to be optimistic and try to overcome hurdles. It's ingrained in us. You can't live without trying to find, to understand people. And, it's part of our human nature, you could say. But what if we can't? What if we share nothing? What if we share little or even nothing? What if there is no common ground, not even the size of a stamp? What if there is nothing but antagonism, conflict, and confusion, no matter how deep we dig? This is an important question. And I hate to be a little bit pessimistic, but there is something eerie, something slightly naive sometimes in a certain kind of optimism, because it seems to assume that the one who searches he will find. The one who searches he will find. Maybe not. Maybe not. We can't be sure about it. And then I think we need to rethink the entire multicultural policy. And then I should sum this up somehow. He did a great summing up. So I think summing up would be simply to say that there are a lot of things we haven't thought through, I think, carefully enough. We need to think them through again. And we need to try to, if we try to go to find solutions, we need to try to avoid stereotypes, cliches, sometimes naive assumptions about commonalities if they don't exist. And there are many, many more things to say about this, but I think I stop there, and hopefully we will have a good discussion about it. Thank you so much.
Göran, thank you. Okay, so Göran has given us a very sobering note at the end of his speech, but what I really liked about it and appreciated about it was it makes clear how serious this conversation is, how important this conversation is, that too often there's been wishful thinking and a refusal to really address the issue head on and be brave enough to have the conversation and talk this one through. So we're really keen to get all your points and questions and thoughts about how we can move forward more constructively. Just whilst you're thinking, I just want to get the ball rolling and ask you to just engage with each other a little bit, because two quite distinct approaches that you took, and what really brought that home to me, Nicola, was you talked about the welcoming population being a shrinking population, and the difficulty of the welcome population integrating into the shrinking welcoming population. In other words, you kind of portrayed it as a question of proportion, a question of numbers. Whereas Göran has kind of spoken about perhaps an additional or a different problem in terms of a question of values and perspectives and a clash of values, and he's identified multiculturalism as part of the problem. So what's your take on Göran's perspective, and how do you see the balance between these two things, the question of volume and the question of multicultural policies?
Well, I do think, of course, the two explaining factors are essentially complementary. I mean, like the grave issues of cultural distance Göran just brought up are made worse, way worse, even worse by the numbers fact, by the fact that it is possible in many European countries or European cities to live within a culturally homogeneous community, which is not that of the welcoming country. As far as the cultural distance can be, when you're an isolated individual in the middle of a society with cultural norms which are not initially yours, well, of course, you're way more incited to adopt at least a part of these cultural values in order to, I would say, to live a normal daily life, in order to get a job, in order to, I would say, to get the normal kind of social interactions you get when you're a human being. When you're able not to do it and to live in a neighborhood, for example, where all the cultural norms are not that of the welcoming country, but that of your own country of origin, well, there's clearly no incentive to do so. So I do think, I would say, like, I don't know if we can say that numbers make the cultural distance worse or the opposite, but the two factors are clearly complementary.
Okay, but what's happened in France with regards to the policy approach with immigration and not just in terms of allowing more immigrants into the country, but in terms of that question of integration, where people are located, in terms of education, because I mean, I think you've written about some of these problems, and certainly we've seen all the riots in France over the years, and I think it was back in 2021, some French generals wrote a big letter about the danger of civil war. It's got that tense and problematic. They were actually talking about civil war in the banlieue and places like that. So what's changed at the level of policy as opposed to the numbers of immigrants?
Well, I mean, in France, as in many European countries, last year was the record high year of all immigration numbers. I mean, record high numbers of first-time residence permits, record high number of first-time asylum applications. So the numbers issue has not been addressed so far at all, and the public debate tends to focus, I would say, on what comes downstream. That is to say, cultural integration of not only immigrants but children of those immigrants, because the integration policy, I would say, understanding now includes the second and sometimes even the third generation, because there's this idea that there's still a gap to be fulfilled. as compared to some other European countries, France never had so far, I would say, an explicitly multicultural approach to these issues. One of the most, I would say, striking symbol of this have been the laws regarding the Islamic veil. For example, the fact that it's not permitted to wear an Islamic scarf in French public schools, for example. So this is one of the few countries in Europe, if not the only one. I don't know if it's the case in Belgium, but it's okay, same in Belgium. But I don't think there are many other countries in which this is forbidden. But I mean, the issue is that you're addressing the problem downstream. You're addressing the problem once immigration has produced its demographic effects, and if you don't address upstream, well, there's still, I would say, a wide room for failure, if I may say.
Okay, and Joran, what's your perspective? I mean, do you see it in this upstream, downstream way? If, for example, we were to address some of the questions that you raised and said, well, let's change the way that we're relating to immigration. Let's change the way we relate to people. At this point in time, take Sweden. Is it possible?
I don't think so. I don't know, because people have vested interests, and now we've had academics, no names, but they have built a career out of, I would say, telling things that are not always true. And they've spent 20, 30, 40 years, and politicians and journalists, and they've made a good life of doing things to our country that is not always very good. I think sometimes they have created a lot of problems, completely unnecessary problems, and to have these people simply turn around and say, you know, my life has been a failure, and you wouldn't do that. And on a subjective level, I understand them. I don't think I'd do it either if I had been one of them, but luckily I'm not. So I think these are huge problems, because we ask people to realize that their life was a mistake, that they were too weak, they were too feeble, they were too keen on you know, ganging up with the crowd, and too feeble, too weak to speak as independent human beings. And we see the result of it. But I'd like to make another comment from your interesting speech. You said something interesting, a phrase I haven't seen. You mentioned the demographic winter. And the funny thing, when you talk about demography, I'm teaching statistics now, so I'm a little bit into this, is that when you talk about demography, many people, especially on the left, they get upset and they start questioning what you're saying. As if you are talking as a politician, as if what you are saying is an ideology. But the lovely thing with statistics is that it's clean. If you say that the birth rate of you know, in the Swedish population is so and so, this is true. I'm not saying it because I'm a right-wing populist. I'm saying this because it is true. So what people are trying to do all the time is they try to pull everything into some nasty, sordid, ideological, you know, game, but it isn't. So I think it is. Sometimes it makes me almost smile, but in effect it is very sad that even statistics is being seen as right-wing or even fascist ideas. You know, so and it also testifies, I would say, to the desperation on the part of some people on the left, because they have so few arguments. They've come to the conclusion that even statistics is right-wing populist, but it's just science, pure science, and yeah. So I just thought that when you mentioned demographic winter, I thought I need to say that this is not ideology; it's just facts.
Right, so we're going to bring the audience
Yes,
in.
please.
And, but we got some microphones? Perfect. Thank you. Please put your hand up if you'd like to speak. We have a gentleman here, and then that other microphone to the gentleman there. Sorry, Jamie, if you could come through. Kyle there, put your hand up higher. Thanks. Please. Sorry, would you mind standing up, actually?
Yeah, sorry. I would... My name is Massimo Maraggetti. I would come back on the concept of demographic winter. Mm-hmm. We have a social system and a welfare state that has been built with assuming a growing population and an excess of workforce. If this is no longer true and we have a declining population and a penury of workforce, then most of the existing legislation should be reviewed. We no longer need unemployment benefits. We no longer need law for protection or against firing. We probably need much less teachers because there are less pupils. So is this logic to you? Do we need to change our welfare system?
Okay, thanks very much. Yes, Kyle, please.
Kyle Green, barrister at law. I'll try not to be too long-winded, but I'm quite worked up about this topic. You see, I studied at the College of Europe. It's an elite European Union finisher school. And I came here 12 weeks ago as a graduated lawyer, having specialised to a degree and being the top of my class in migration law. And now I realise with Houston we have a big problem. I'll give you a personal anecdote. I was in Bourse last night in McDonald's, and a North African man in a tracksuit and runners came up to people beside me, pointing his phone like a gun at multiple people in McDonald's. No one did anything. I confronted him, and then he just brushed it off. I went outside, and his buddies, North Africans in tracksuit and runners, I couldn't believe it, were there. One of them had a claw hammer and was mock attacking his friends in the knee with the claw hammer. Incredibly intimidating. A few nights prior to that, I was walking down the streets alone, same sorts of people, a huge group of them were walking in the street yelling, came up to me, a scrawny little guy in the group, when he passed me, said, "Tagul fuse de pute," which means "fuck off, you son of a whore." Obviously, I did nothing. 2 occasions prior to that, I've had people like that try to steal my phone. And on the first occasion, I was attacked with a weapon that left me scarred. And a cause of that, I mean, I'm really totally losing faith in European Union values. In fact, I have lost them. And that's why I'm saying, well, Houston, Texas, I'm coming to call because I don't want to, the European ship is sinking. And a second point I want to make is, what the hell is happening in Syria? Yet we have US and Israeli funded Al-Qaeda attacking Assad, attacking Christians. What's that about? Now, this is a controversial idea, but you see it on X that there are right-wing Jewish populations that are, namely Israel, that are causing wars in the East. And then I've met people like this, left-wing Jews, who say, well, we want to bring more people of color into white countries like Europe, and who support all of these refugee initiatives. And I think that's quite problematic, and I think it's a problem that we probably can't address, and I think that's why I want to leave and go to America or somewhere else. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. Right, we'll take a couple more. Yes, so there's in front, yeah, please. And this gentleman here, yeah.
Yes.
Please stand up.
Please
Thanks.
stand up.
Robert Kerr. As a professor of Islamology, I just want to make a few remarks confirming what you've been saying. First of all, with your demography, it's been said often by Arabic leaders, Tebboune, the president of Algeria recently, but also the Saudi Arabian kings, that the high fertility rate among Muslims is the female component of jihad. So it's stated clearly, they don't pretend otherwise. It's so men go out with Kalashnikovs and women do other things. Everybody has their own thing. And for Adamson, colleague Adamson, there is integration going on. The problem is, if you look at Islamic history, it's always towards Islam. So it's an Arabification in most cases, and an Islamification. So the point is, if we don't integrate the people, so this idea that things remain inert or neutral or what have you, or as you said, stay in their own isolated communities, that won't remain that way. So Islam is, North Africa was Berber, now it's Arab speaking. Syria was Aramaic speaking, now it's Arab speaking, etc. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Robert. Yes, please.
Yeah, more of a question for Nicholas. When it comes, you talked about integration. Just a very simple question. What kind of policies would you suggest to maybe better integrate, let's say, immigrants that come to France, taking into account that there is a French culture, like a strong French culture? Yep.
Okay, great question. Thank you. Right, I'll give you a chance to respond to the questions, and then we'll keep coming out for more points from the audience. And do please feel free to start trying to answer some of these questions yourselves. Yeah, so don't just make these guys do all the hard work. Nicholas, right? So you had a question directed at you, particularly about demographic winter and reform of the welfare system, and then this question here about French culture. Surely French culture is strong enough to project itself as something. So please go ahead.
Of course. As regards the issues posed by the demographic winter to the welfare system, you're perfectly right. I mean, the most striking example of it all is the retirement system. In France, we don't have the what's called elsewhere the pension funds. People capitalizing on their own assets, preparing their own retirement. We have a socialized retirement system in which the currently working are paying for the currently retired. And once the currently working will be retired, that will be the ones working at that time that will be paying for their retirement, etc. This used to work when the working versus retired ratio was way positive for the working population. It's not the case anymore. So now each 4 or 5 years in France, you get a huge reform of the retirement system, which gets everyone out on the street because it's very unpopular. But on the long term, of course, the whole system is not sustainable at all. And the same can be said to as regards many aspects of our welfare systems. You're perfectly right. The point is that sometimes in the public debate, you get the argument that in order to sustain these welfare systems, well, you need to get immigration, because you need to renew the working population in order to get people paying taxes and social contributions, sustaining the whole welfare system. This could theoretically work to some extent, but the fact is that, at least in the French context, but this applies to many European countries, the current levels of unemployment, inactivity, low-skilled work among immigrants, and especially among non-European immigrants, makes it, I would say, very unlikely that they are able, on average, to contribute positively to the system. To give more to the system than they receive from it. So, at least in the current state of immigration policies in France, immigration is clearly not an answer to maintain the whole welfare system alive. And as regards the second question regarding integration policies, well, I would say the reflex to come back to the upstream once again. We have a specificity in France, which is that we have the most African immigration of all the European Union. According to OECD data, 61% of immigrants in France in working age, that is to say between the age of 15 and 64, were originating from the African continent in 2019 among all immigrants living in France at that time. So it was 3 times higher than the EU average. And of course, that makes the whole point of cultural distance way more, I would say, difficult to address by some aspects than it is in other European countries, when you have a more mixed immigration with people coming from Africa, but also many people coming from other European countries, or Southeast Asia, or South America. So there's this point. And well, as regards the downstream part, France, as many European societies, is experiencing the sort of self-loath, self-harassment, culturally speaking, than many of its neighbors. It may be even more, I would say, disconcerting, because, well, I tend to think that French culture is great. But among the elites, for example, the elites running the educational system, you don't have this idea that the educational system should have among its missions, among its raison d'être, the fact to share, for example, French history or French cultures, and especially to the children of the newcomers. This is something that has been excluded from the school programs for decades now, or at least it has been publicly said that it was not school's goal to make new French, let's say, to produce new French people out of immigrant backgrounds. So once again, upstream is the most important, and downstream, a school system which would not be shy to endorse French culture could be a great asset for sure.
Can you just say just a little bit more on that last point? Because a school system that is shy of promoting French culture, that's a pretty strong statement, isn't it?
Yeah.
And so you keep saying upstream is the problem. And now I'm beginning to think, I'm not sure I'm so convinced, because the idea that France, with its proud history, and, I tell you what, I'll be honest, right? So us Brits, it would always, there's always been a little bit of tension, right? And us Brits, it would always be them arrogant French, right? That would be the way you would talk as I was growing up in the 70s and the 80s. But there was an understanding that it was based on an incredible pride in what had been achieved, and the sort of sense, the ideas of the Enlightenment, universalism, the Napoleonic era, and everything that achieved. What an incredible and amazing thing. Yeah, even if we said you were arrogant, we recognised that it was incredible and amazing.
There were reasons to be.
Exactly, right? And now you're basically saying that no one really thinks that's worth saying too much about to people coming to France. That's,
but I mean, this is an idea that is, of course, held in some of the most radical progressive spheres, but not only in these spheres. I mean, in his first presidential election campaign, Emmanuel Macron once famously said there was no such thing as French culture. There was a culture in French which was diverse, etc., etc. So this gives you the idea of the whole mood within a significant part of the French elite. So of course, Tony, downstream should not be neglected, but I would say upstream is the big issue, and downstream can make it worse sometimes. But if you don't have upstream, you don't have to manage downstream, if I may say.
Okay, right. So, Joran, your responses to the questions. So you can pick up on the ones that Nicholas did, or also there was a question about Carl's experience of being attacked, and
there were good questions all around here. But one thing I'd like to you mentioned this statement where he said that there is no such thing as a French culture. The Swedish former conservative, mark my words, Prime Minister Fredrik Reinfeldt, he said that everything Swedish is merely barbaric. Everything good came from the outside. And a left-winger, she said, that's why you Turkish people, a few years ago, she said, that's why you Turkish people have so much things to be proud of. What do we have in Sweden? We're dancing around the midsummer, midsummer dances and ridiculous stuff like that. And these are not loonies. These are like heads of state, basically, saying these things. So I think that saps into some kind of European. It's an old tradition in Europe among certain, I would claim, mostly literary intellectuals and left-wingers, but also some conservatives, where they get a kick out of harassing their own culture, their own history, their own background. And it doesn't make sense. I mean, you can say a lot about it, and that's actually part of my book, came out a few years ago. Because this is like, it's not the self-hatred and the object of their self-hatred and self-criticism is fictitious. They know that women have a good situation in Sweden. They know that, for instance, that we treat migrants well, and yet they cannot stop, harassing it. And when I say harassing it, they harass something that they make up because it gives them pleasure, it gives them a kick. So it's just a European phenomenon among certain leading stratas of society. But there was another thing I'd like to pick up. Somebody mentioned in an interesting question the issue of having discussions, or the dangers of having discussions. And one concept which is often used is the concept of having a dialogue. We need to have a dialogue. And then I think you, I'm sorry, I can't remember who it was, mentioned that this sometimes is only a kind of tool for certain migrant groups to push their agenda. They take a lot and they give very little. So I think sometimes you should be wary of this idea that we need to have a dialogue. We need to have, well, a dialogue means that you try to reach a common position, and that is not always the case. Another thing I'd like to pick up is that you can see, someone also said that no society is stable. Everything changes. Things are always in flux. And if there is no integration, you can actually ask the question, could there be traces of a movement, a very unfortunate movement, in the other direction, from the host society, maybe from the young population in the host society? And I have noticed a very interesting tendency. Maybe I'm wrong, but maybe this is a telling detail, meaning there is something in it. For instance, in Berlin, I have seen sometimes completely Berlin girls or young women. They have started to put on something around their head. I don't think they're Muslims, but they do it, and it looks fashionable. But sometimes I've thought, what is that? Is that some kind of slow trend towards a headscarf? What is happening here? And I also saw it here in Brussels. I think it was only yesterday. I was passing in a bus, and I saw two women. They were fixing something. They also looked like ordinary, Belgian girls. They were fixing something with some kind of thing they put on their heads. And then I had this terrible pessimistic thought that, well, things are changing, but maybe not in one direction, but maybe in another direction. So I just thought this was an interesting case, and, well, maybe a telling detail for some unfortunate trends in terms of fashion.
So you're suggesting that maybe there's a more confident assertion of, if you like, Islamic culture and the behaviours that go with that, and that could be attracting non-Muslims within Europe in that direction.
Could be attracting some purely some purely Swedish or German or Belgian young women.
Okay.
And which, I mean, from my point of view, I mean, the way I've been born and raised should go against the grain of any kind of basic, I mean, you don't even need to be feminist, but any basic female attitude towards life. And still it might be happening, and that concerns me quite a lot, I have to say.
Okay, interesting. So again, very keen to hear from the audience and your thoughts. We've got two there, just down the side. I will come to you. In fact, Jamie, sorry, could we have that microphone at the front, please?
Thank you. I have a question actually following up exactly on what you just said, Mr. Adamson.
Yes.
Why and how did conservatives stop wanting to conserve as they are supposed to? Conserve our society, conserve our values, defend our history. If I look back throughout the Cold War, in Western Europe, not in Eastern Europe, but in Western Europe, we had the freedom to observe left-wing loonies who wanted to overturn society, who would have loved the idea of criminalizing Sovietophobia. But no conservative would have ever dreamed of governing with a left-wing loony trying to criminalize Sovietophobia and making concessions and saying that, of course, in the long run, it might be very good for Western Europe to join Eastern Europe in the Soviet system. This would have been unthinkable. Throughout, in the left, there was always a distinction between the communists and the social democrats. This was clear because conservatives are conservatives.
Yes.
How is it possible that nowadays most conservative parties, with Germany as the darkest example, have completely switched sides and are enthusiastically governing with parties that openly say that they want to overturn our society? Famously in Germany, the Greens saying that in the beginning of the migrant crisis, Germany will face dramatic challenges and they are looking forwards to it. They're not talking about mitigating, trying to manage a crisis. They welcome, they applaud the crisis, they encourage the crisis. When did the conservatives turn into revolutionaries, basically, who despise their own cultures and societies?
Okay, great question, thanks. And if you could pass it back to the lady behind. and then we'll have this gentleman after the lady. Yeah.
Originally, I only had one question, but I think me as a German right now, I have a lot to say to all of the stuff. First of all, one thing to the headscarf thing. Me as a girl who occasionally wears a headscarf around my head. Funny thing, the first time I wore it, the first time I posted a picture on Instagram with it, my friend commented under the picture with babushka, which is the Russian word for grandmother, because it's not... A lot of cultures have the headscarf, and especially if you don't wear it with like the hair hidden, but like with hair showing, a lot of cultures have that aspect, not only the Islam culture. And the second one is my question from before, or my comment from before was, from Germany, we have experienced a big migration crisis, but mainly, as I would argue mainly, because we don't have the resources to handle it. We welcome people in our country, but the institutions where we have people inside, they're terrible. For example, I live in Munich, and close to Munich there's Landshut. It's an old Bavarian town. And there is an old prison, which is now just an artifact. Like, you can visit it, you can see it. But since 2022, the prison turned into a refugee camp. What signal are we sending to people if we turn our old prisons into refugee camps? Obviously, people get mad. Obviously, people get frustrated. We don't have the resources for language courses. We don't offer language courses. People get deported after 2 years being successfully in Germany, integrated in our culture, and then getting deported because our bureaucracy is so slow that we didn't have the time to deport the people at the time, and now we're deporting them after integrating them in our culture. I think I have a bigger problem with the fact of the state failing to integrate people than the people integrating themselves, because resources are just not there, and the resources which are there are terrible.
Thank you very much. Yes, this gentleman at the front.
Yes, I would like to respond to you, something that I heard.
Would you mind standing up?
Yeah, yes, sir. I was told for French ladies that, for example, they need to wear like Muslim ladies in certain neighborhoods to be safe. Otherwise, they will be they suffer harassment. I heard that. Secondly, I would like to say that what is hidden, not hidden, but not violent invasion is happening now. Why? I think it's technology. Is internet, because for newborns, the concept of diversity is something it makes immense sense. For me, for example, I'm a developer. I'm in several communities where I share information with Americans, Canadians.
He's speaking to the microphone.
Yeah, Europeans and so on. So for millennials, the concept of diversity is very common because they are in a very multicultural, diverse ambience. I think we are lacking of information for the citizen to know what really is happening, what really we are losing, or the freedom of speech, all the liberty, all the European values. And I think we need to enforce the educational system to make people understand what really is happening before it's too late.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thanks for a good comment.
Let's see some more hands. Yes, this gentleman here has had his hand up a long time, and then this lady, please, here in the red, Bela.
Okay, thank you. I happen to be a journalist, most uploads from Brussels Times. I would like to ask both of you, Niklas and Göran. Okay, I think that figures matter. So the first small question is whether we can be sure that the majority of immigrants to Western countries really are, Muslim immigrants, if they really are Islamist, extremists with such extremist views. But then comes a common question to both of you. I suppose that the trends are a bit different in both France and Sweden. But the question is related to the previous question from Germany about the failure of integration. It's simple like that. Can we, both migrants, immigrants, and native citizens in our different countries, can we have multiple identities? Can integration be combined with the preservation, let's say, of the cultural identity which, those who immigrated brought with them? Or must it always be, let's say, integration which requires complete assimilation, or, I mean, as we have seen about in France, in the banlieues, as you talked about, and also in Sweden, we have immigration ghettos there. Must it always be, let's say, separation and marginalization of those who immigrated? And what about, let's say, the second and third generations of immigrants? I mean, we did not manage to be completely integrated, especially, and I suppose it's quite common also in Sweden, let's say if at least one of the parents, let's say, is a native citizen. And it means that the children, the second generation or the third generation, are brought up, let's say, in, let's say, mixed families.
Okay, thanks very much. Yes, please, here.
My name is Bela Goldberg. I'm Belgian. I'm living in Brussels. I was born in Brussels, and my parents, my father came from, let's call it Poland, and my mother from Berlin. So I have questions, and I have also statements to do about what was said regarding Belgium, and especially Brussels. First of all, it's just a detail, but what you said about fashion, it's not a fashion that put a scarf in the way they are wearing the scarf now. Just remind how Grace Kelly was wearing the scarf. At that moment, it was a fashion. It was a fashion, and, well, as young women, young girls, we put our silk scarves the same way. Nowadays, we won't do it. What you thought that was fashion, what you saw in Berlin, that the girls, they looked like other, yes, not immigrant of born from immigrants. You know, I'm always struck. I see girls who are wearing the scarves, and they are wearing very molding jeans. So there is something contradictory there. They are following a fashion, but from what I hear, the way they speak Arabic. Now, are you aware that it's just a question of time, that it was proposed at our parliament that Arabic would become the fourth national language? You are aware we have 3 national languages in Belgium: French, Dutch, and German. So why would Arabic become the fourth language in Belgium? That's really unimaginable. Why was it? It was refused because it didn't got the 10,000 signature necessary to be proposed at the parliament and to be voted. So just wait, and in a few years it will come. It will be adopted, because what is now as you said.
Okay, Bela, you need to finish your point. Yeah.
Yes. So I want to know, because there is something. Here it's clash of values. When did we hear really about the clash of values? Do you know to be member of the European Union, the members should adhere to the Judeo-Christian values. When the Constitution was renewed, they abandoned democracy because they were criteria to be part of the European Union, and the Judeo-Christian values were abandoned.
Okay.
It was a big fight. It was a very big fight.
Yeah.
So are you
Doesn't have to
aware
ask
of
the question,
that?
but she has to finish.
Yes,
Thank you, Balin. Thank you. Right. Take 2 or 3 more points. We've got, sorry, I can't see you all. Yeah, 2 people there, that lady and that gentleman. And then right at the, we'll try and get you all in, okay? Yeah.
Hi, so I'm American from the accent, and well, also from where I was born, of course, but I thought that it was very interesting what you were saying about there not being necessarily a coherent or a strong culture to integrate into, because I think about that, I've been thinking about that a lot for the past few years as an American, kind of noticing that for the European example as well, the idea that what is a Swede, what is a Frenchman, and what is an American, which I think might be even more difficult historically to define. And so I was wondering if you thought that national identities are being like irrevocably eroded, or eroded at all, because I mean I would probably say so. And I thought that point was interesting, and the idea of a self-cannibalizing culture that you were explaining, like multiculturalism and kind of this oxymoronic and self-destructive idea of diversity being a uniting force, like these kind of ideas. If you think that this is reversible, or and also if you would say that this migration crisis, which obviously is much more pressing in Europe, but also across the pond, is also becoming an issue as well. I would definitely say whether that is this crisis is taking advantage, like the hostile takeover is taking advantage of a culture that has already become vulnerable and has been destroying itself for a few decades, or whether, I guess, which one came first, or the relationship between them.
Great, thank you so much for a great question. Right, please, for everybody else, you're going to need to keep it really to the point, and warning to Nicholas and Iran, you're going to have to choose some of these questions to answer to finish up.
I know what to choose.
Yeah? Okay, go ahead.
Academia. So you talk about a left-wing academia that has been for decades trying to push this multiculturalism issue kind of to the table and to young people. So my question as a 21-year-old, obviously studying in the Netherlands, I received a very patriotic education because I'm a Hungarian at home. I've been here for like 2 years now. So how do you plan to kind of reverse this ongoing indoctrination that is going on in our institutions for decades? And how do you plan to kind of tell young people that what they were learning and studying about is just kind of a hoax or like a loose concept?
Okay, thanks very much. Then we're going to go over this side. We've got a gentleman and a lady this side.
Hello, my name is Aldis. I'm from Latvia. I wanted to ask, what is the indicator when someone is integrated, when we can say that I'm integrated into the society? And our local European societies accepting someone from outside? I've been living in and out of Europe for almost 20 years, and I can speak the language, I can act as the local, but I will still be seen as the foreigner and feel certain proportion of, yeah, you can say even arrogance. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, there's a lady behind you, and then if we could have the other microphone, Jamie, to finally Lisette here with her hand up. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I've got a question about the expression used in the title of the conference. We're talking about a clash of values, but in my opinion, we should rather talk about great replacement, because clash of values refers to the context when the threat was external, with all the wars in the 80s and 90s, whereas now we are talking about an internal threat and a complete shift, not rather an opposition, but rather something that is killing the thing from the inside.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, Lisette, you also need to keep it short, please.
Yes, I want to tap into the American girl who said something. How do you guys see U.S. foreign policy in this picture of migration? The question is for both gentlemen, France and Sweden. Barbara Specter is in Sweden, and you have a rabbi in France who says that Islam is the broom of Israel. Rabbi David, I cannot even pronounce his name, but you know Barbara Specter.
Okay. Thank you very much. Right. Yuran, you go first. You got like 3 or 4 minutes.
Okay. I think you mentioned the idea if we can reverse the trend that is ongoing in Belgium and so forth, the ideological indoctrination and so forth. I don't want to reverse anything. I talked to some very conservative guy, more than conservative, and he said it's time to make the higher education conservative, he said. And I said, no, that's not what it's about. It's time not to make it ideological. We need to make it meritocratic. We need to be open. We need to try to set up a university as it was supposed to be again, where you have discussions. The way to counter a left ideology at universities is not to set up some kind of opposite idea, a right-wing ideology. That is basically doing the same thing from the other end. The only way to oppose an idealization of the university, whether from the left or from the right, is to get rid of all these things and just to have an open discussion. That's the point of a university. I think this is an important point to make. And then the lady at the back talked about borders and said, I think borders are in danger or something like that. That's what I think too. I think borders are in danger, and I think borders are very important to preserve. And what I see now, and it's easy to be sloppy, but I have the impression sometimes that some politicians, some of them here in Brussels, they are trying to erase the borders between cultures and countries in Europe. And because these countries have been formed by people who went there and then they started doing things together, they slowly developed a common culture, common identity, common language and so forth. And they tried to take away the borders, and then they want to shake the whole thing up and bring in also cultures from other continents overseas. And they bring all these individuals together, all these cultures, and then they shake everything up. And then they just let loose, and then they say, this is going to be wonderful. I don't think so. I think it's going to be very bad. I think it's going to be very poor, because this is a huge experiment they're doing, which I think goes against the entire idea of people getting together and trying to create a society for themselves. And mind you, I'm not saying some cultures are better than others. I'm just saying that cultures are different. But to cite one of my heroes, George Orwell, he says that it's not a matter of who is better and who is worse. It's just a matter of difference. But that's hard enough. Thank you.
Could you actually just answer, in addition to end on, there was this question about, can we have multiple identities?
No. Sorry, I don't think so. I think if you have multiple identities, you are likely schizophrenic. You can't. You need to have one identity. Of course you can change. I'm not the same here as I am at home, but multiple identities. I think, you know what I think this is? This is a postmodern nonsense. This is that you can play with identities. I can be this, I can be that, and identities, they don't mean anything, but they do. Even for a postmodernist, their identity as a postmodernist is deeply ingrained. If you would question the postmodernist's identity, they would be as upset as I would be. So that's their problem, not my problem.
Okay, thanks very much, Joran. Nicolas.
Yes, to answer a few of the very interesting questions that were posed, perhaps the one on the, I would say, the most relevant integration indicators. Of course, there are no, I would say, obvious response to this, but I have two things that come to my mind. One is on the economics side, and one is on the social side. On the economical side, I think indicators relating to employment level for the first generation of immigrants and skills and qualification level for the second generations are quite relevant in order to see what the trajectory is from one generation to the other, as well as to assess contribution to the workforce, which is actually the most obvious form of contribution to the welcoming society. So I do think there's an interesting field on this integration side. And on the most on the more social aspect, I think mixed marriages may be an interesting indicator in the French context, but as in many European societies, you've got very different results on mixed marriages according to the types of immigrants you are interested in. For example, to take, I would say, the two extreme sides of the spectrum of non-European immigration in France, you have in France about 90% of women born to Turkish immigrant parents who marry a man from Turkish descent. So this is like the maximal endogamy. And on the other, I would say, extreme of the spectrum, you've got women born from Southeast Asian parents, which are quite numerous in France, and you have only 14% of them who marry an husband from the same migratory background as their parents. So, of course, this shows that I would say cultural integration must come at some stage with the mixing of families. And you know, I would say it's the most. I would say I'm looking for the right word. Yeah, it's the most obvious way to assess that someone is, does not have any a priori preference for its own community, but is, I would say, perfectly integrated in society. So that's one possible answer. And the second question I would like to answer is the one related to the role of the EU and its not happened constitution and its treaties on these issues. It has to be said that so far the EU has both played an undeniable role in the acceleration of immigration. I mean, by the effect of its treaties, by the effect of its derived laws, the directives, the regulations, etc. And it has also played a key role, I would say, in the fact of emptying European identity and the very definition of Europe of any cultural substance. You know, when you listen to EU officials, sometimes you get the impression that Europe's only own identity is the fact that it is open to other identities, that it is open to other cultures. Like there would be a fundamental void, a fundamental emptiness within Europe's definition that could only be fulfilled by welcoming other cultures and identities. Of course, this may appear like pure nonsense according to everything that Europe has brought to the human civilization, but it is at the core of a large part of EU's official discourse now. Of course, there's no EU bubble conspiracy to I would say, to implement this. This is the kind of ideology you also get within nation states. You also get within nation states leaders and governments. You also get within academia. So this is, I would say, the result in Brussels of this ideology that is at work on the ground as well.
Okay, Nicolas, thank you very much. Thank you
You're
to
welcome.
both of our speakers. So there's loads left on the table, plenty to argue over. We have wine outside the door if you would like, or soft drinks if you prefer. It's your choice, free country. So please continue the debate. If you're not already on our newsletter and enjoyed this evening, want to hear about our events next year, please sign up from our website or talk to me or one of my colleagues. And thank you indeed to my colleague Philip Siguer for organising this evening.